Good Tuesday afternoon, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandajis here with your tropical update, and we have three named systems out there to talk about today. Hurricane Teddy, Tropical Depression Beta, and Paulette. Yeah, it's back. It's back to a tropical storm. Wait till you see where exactly it is located. Here's a look at the broad Atlantic basin. A lot of activity out there. Most prominent feature is Hurricane Teddy undergoing an extratropical transition as it moves off to the north. It's a massive system with a very large wind field. And then Beta that moved onshore last night on the coast of Texas and is weakened down to a tropical depression, but it's only moving at 2 miles per hour. Remember, Sally did the exact same thing, dropped a lot of rain. Not as powerful of a system, thankfully, but still bringing over a half foot to even a foot of rainfall in some spots in southeastern Texas, and eventually as it gets a move on off to the north and east in through Louisiana and Mississippi. Here's how it looks currently on visible satellite imagery. Yeah, 35-mile-per-hour winds right now, so it has fallen below the criteria to be designated as a tropical storm, which is 39 miles per hour or greater. Still some gusts up to around 45, but the legacy of this storm is not going to be the wind or the really relative strength of the storm. It's going to be the amount of water it brought, the amount of rainfall, and it being a slow mover once again as well. There's a look at radar. It's not widespread heavy rain, but a lot of the areas that are getting the heavier downpours and tropical downpours are seeing it over and over again because of the slow forward movement of this storm. Here's a look at the track. By early tomorrow morning, we're still generally in the same area. It doesn't start to get a little bit faster in its forward movement until we get to Wednesday night and early Thursday. As it picks up that forward speed, we have a trough, a cold front coming in from the northwest, and that's going to give it a little bit of a nudge to get it moving on out of here. And then it sails up through Louisiana and eventually into Mississippi. At that point is a remnant low, but still plenty of moisture with it. It is a tropical system, so it has a lot of moisture and a lot of rainfall. You can see some of the forecast models here putting up and over 3 to 5 to as much as 8 inches in some locally higher areas off to the north of New Orleans there. So certainly still going to bring some issues. But Beta, despite it being relatively weak, did make history. It was the 9th storm so far this season to make landfall in the United States. Look at all the storms that have made landfall so far this season. I mean, all over the place. Very, very active. But some stats of interest here in terms of Beta. The first Greek letter storm to make landfall in the United States. Granted, we haven't had many Greek alphabet names. We had 6 back in 2005, and all of those did not make landfall in the U.S. And then we had 2 so far this season. Alpha obviously was nowhere near the United States, and Beta did make landfall. Overall, the 9th storm to make U.S. landfall, so that ties us with the most ever on record, which was back in 1916. That also had 9 named storms make landfall in the U.S. We'll see if we break it. Certainly possible. Still 68 days left in the 2020 hurricane season, and it wraps up on November 30th. Just because November 30th is the calendar end for the hurricane season doesn't mean Mother Nature is going to stop having tropical systems, okay? It can certainly happen well into well into December and even January. In fact, 2005 had a couple storms out in December and even into January too. All right, let's talk about Teddy right now. Huge system here as it's moving into the northern parts of the Atlantic. You can see it undergoing that extratropical transition. It's pulling in a lot of dry air from the south, interacting with a cold front off towards its west, but it still is a warm core low, warm core center. So that's why it's still categorized as a hurricane, even though it's really going to become a post-tropical cyclone here in the next 12 to 24 hours. But packing winds of 100 miles an hour. We talked yesterday how this would be strengthening as it lifted north. It was over still very warm ocean waters, but it is heading towards Nova Scotia with winds gusting up to 125 miles an hour. You look at the overall size of this storm. It stretches about 1,500 miles wide in diameter. That's about the same distance from the northern tip of Maine all the way to the southern tip of Florida and Miami. Huge system. And on top of that, the overall wind field is massive too. We'll see it pop up here in a second, but the overall hurricane force winds extend out around 90 miles from the center. And then we have tropical storm force winds extending out 360 miles from that center there. So that's very, very interesting how wide that wind field is. Here's how it looks on visible satellite imagery. A textbook-looking system here as it lifts off towards the north. And another very interesting feature that you do not see every day, and this is like weather nerd status right here. This 2,000-mile-long cold front actually connects Teddy with Beta. Very, very cool to see that here on satellite imagery. 2,000-mile-long cold front. Where's Teddy headed? As you saw, due north. Category 2 now, becoming post-tropical and heading through Nova Scotia within the next 12 hours. Now let's get over to Paulette. 40-mile-per-hour winds. The first advisory on Paulette was back on September 6th. Remember, it became a pretty prominent hurricane. It made landfall in Bermuda as a Category 2. And then by the 16th, it was the last advisory issued from the National Hurricane Center. It was in the North Atlantic, kind of petering on about. But since it held its actual center of circulation, it's low, it never really totally went away. It was a remnant low. And then once it moved into more favorable conditions, it started to develop once again. And that's what this spin right here is. It's not a very potent storm, but nonetheless, it's interesting to see. There's the Azores, there's Madeira, and there's the Canary Islands. So in an area we don't typically see a lot of tropical development, but this is already the second so far in the last couple weeks. Remember, Alpha developed and headed into Portugal just last week. Where's it headed from here? Still going to be a tropical storm into tomorrow, 40-mile-per-hour winds. It heads east and then drops south and then heads back off towards the west. But zooming things out, you can see the trek that this storm went on, again, September 6th when the first advisory was on it, and then it moved all the way off towards the northwest, the North Atlantic, sagged back to the south, and is redeveloped. Just cool to see that. All right, that's the latest today out in the tropics. If you have a question, don't be afraid to ask. You can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Twitter. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you tomorrow.